Hey guys, in today's video, we are taking an in-depth look at Samsung Pulse-Gen QD-OLED gaming monitor, the Odyssey OLED G80SH. This is a flat 32-inch 4K monitor with a 240Hz refresh rate, DisplayPort 2.1, UHBR20, USB-C with laptop charging, HDMI 2.1, AI upscaling, new 4th generation Penta-Tandem QD-OLED panel. And this panel is what makes this monitor especially interesting. I wanted to answer the questions that actually matter. Does the extra brightness make a visible difference? Is auto brightness limiting or APL less aggressive? Has text clarity improved? Can it really run at 4K and 240Hz without display stream compression or DSC for short? And how well does it perform across a gaming PC, USB-C devices such as notebooks and tablets that use Samsung DeX, as well as gaming consoles like PlayStation 5 and Nintendo Switch 2. I tested all of that together with every setting offered by the monitor. So by the end of this video, you should know exactly what the G80SH can do and whether this could be the right OLED monitor for your setup. So without further ado, let's get right in. As you can see, I haven't opened the monitor yet because I intentionally left the entire unboxing for this video. This way, you can see exactly for yourself what comes inside the box. And as soon as I opened it, the first thing that surprised me was this power supply. It's the size of the adapter you will receive with a top-tier gaming laptop. It has a maximum output of 240 watts, which makes more sense when you realize that it needs to power the monitor itself while also providing up to 98 watts of power delivery via USB-C. It lacks HDMI 2.1 cable, but we still have a USB-C. Samsung also includes a DisplayPort 2.1 cable. At least this way, you have the main cables required for possible scenarios. Looking at the disc mount, Samsung appears to have slightly redesigned it. It feels a little lighter, and instead of using the older rubber cable clip for cable management, we now have this opening hole built directly into the stand to pass them through. And honestly, it feels cleaner this way. The disc base feels lighter as well. Looking underneath, you can see a combination of structural metal and plastic covering. That's going to reduce some of the weight while still keeping the base quite stable. And finally, here is the monitor itself. My first impression is that the rear design looks extremely clean. It's slim, minimalist, and quite premium looking. And you can see here on the back, we have this RGB ring that can be controlled via the OSD. The silver finish also makes it easier to integrate into a clean disk setup. Looking at the connections, we first have the DC power input. We then have two USB-A downstream ports. One of these is also labeled for service use, and that's the exact port you can use when installing firmware updates through a USB flash drive. There is a USB Type-C input, which can carry the display signal, USB data, and up to 98 watts of charging through a single cable. It can also connect the monitor's USB hub to the laptop, allowing your keyboard, mouse, and other peripherals to remain connected through the monitor USB input. We then have one DisplayPort 2.1 UHBR20 input. This is one of the biggest upgrades compared with Samsung's earlier G81SH 4K QD-OLED monitor, which uses DisplayPort 1.4 that normally needs display stream compression to deliver 4K at 240Hz, while now we got this one that has native DisplayPort 2.1 UHBR20 that give us 20 gigabits per second across each of the 4 DisplayPort lanes. Now after that, we have two HDMI 2.1 inputs. These are ideal for modern consoles such as the PlayStation 5 and the Switch 2. Unfortunately, there are no built-in speakers with this one, so the audio output 3.5mm audio jack is useful if you want to connect headphones or external speakers directly to the monitor and receive audio from HDMI, DisplayPort, or USB-C. Finally, we have 4-directional joystick for controlling the on-screen display or OSD. For wall mounting or a monitor arm, it uses phase standard 100 by 100mm. and Samsung specifies a suitable screw depth range from 7.5 up to 10.5 M4 screws. Make sure that the screws are long enough to secure the mount without extending too far to the monitor to avoid any kind of damage. Now you can see that the model I got is the S32HG800SU with the complete model number LS32HG800SU-XEN. Now installing the disk mount is extremely straightforward. You lift the locking button, align the stand with the mounting point, it automatically clicks and locks into place. And that's it. While installing the disk base is just as easy. You place the disk mount into the base and tighten the captive screw underneath. The screw includes its own folding handle, so you don't even need a screwdriver. In terms of ergonomics, the included stand provides practically everything most users will need. You can tilt the display, swivel it from side to side, and adjust its height. At the minimum height, distance between the bottom of the display and disk is around 5 centimeters, while at the maximum height, it can increase to 17 centimeters. We can also rotate it all the way, switching into portrait mode. So overall, the stand gives us the standard range of adjustment. To me, the finish looks very similar to the one Samsung has used on some of their other recent OLED displays, including last year's G81SH 32-inch and the 42-inch S90H OLED TV that I reviewed just few days ago. Instead of seeing a sharp mirror-like reflection directly over the image, the reflected light is spread across a wider area and becomes less distracting. This makes the monitor considerably easier to position in a bright room. It does a very good job of diffusing direct reflections. However, it's worth saying that it does not have similar black shield film found on some newer ASUS QD-OLED monitors. Black shield is a separate ASUS coating designed to absorb more ambient light, maintain deeper looking blacks in a bright environment, and improve scratch resistance. The trade-off is that this is clearly a matte coating. A glossy or semi-gloss display can look clearer. This matte coating prioritizes reflection control and usability under normal lighting. Which one is better will depend on your room and personal preference. Now, this is where the G80SH becomes especially interesting. It uses Samsung's 4th generation QD-OLED panel with the new penta-tandem structure. Previous QD-OLED panels used 4 emitting layers, while this new design increases that to 5. This spreads the workload across more organic material, helping the panel produce more brightness while improving efficiency and potentially reducing long-term wear. Samsung display claims around 1.3 times higher luminance efficiency and twice the operational lifespan compared with its previous design. And it also has VESA Display HDR True Black 500 certification, while last year's model was VESA Display HDR True Black 400. It also claims peak brightness of up to 1000 nits under very specific small window conditions. Later, I'll test also APL performance to see whether that improvement is actually noticeable. I've now connected the monitor to my PC through DisplayPort 2.1 using the included cables that it came with. The first thing I recommend doing is installing Samsung official monitor driver for this one that you can download on this monitor support page. The driver allows Windows to identify the exact model and install supplied monitor information and color profile. Once installed, we can see Samsung color profile has been assigned. Heading to advanced display settings on Windows, we find the following. Resolution is set to 4K at 240Hz refresh rate, color depth of 10 bits per channel, which is the maximum it can get, and it shows a 500 nit HDR of peak brightness. That's all out of the box. Simply sync 4K at 240Hz inside Windows doesn't automatically prove that the connection is using the full UHBR20 link. The system could potentially use a lower link speed together with display stream compression or DSC, we can check the actual connection using GPU-Z app, a free tool from Tech Power Up. Here you can see that the DisplayPort link is running at 20 gigabits per second per lane. DisplayPort uses 4 lanes, 20 multiplied by 4 equal 80, so that confirms the full 80 gigabits per second UHBR20 connection. This also confirms that my GPU, the RTX 5090, the monitor, and the DisplayPort cable included inside the box that comes with this monitor are all operating at the highest available link rate. So the supplied cable is absolutely good enough to use. The only limitation remaining is its length, which is 1 meter. For anyone who needs a longer cable, I recently reviewed this 2-meter DP80 cable from Silkland. It's officially certified for UHBR20, and I can also confirm that it also maintains the full 20 gigabits per second speed across all 4 lanes. And certification matters here because a cable may still appear to work at 4K and 240 Hz while the system quietly drops to a lower DisplayPort link rate and enables DSC. DSC is designed to be visually lossless, so that doesn't necessarily mean the image will suddenly look worse. But if your goal is to use the full uncompressed UHBR20 connection, look for the official DP80 certification. You can always check the cable model on DisplayPort official database website. You also shouldn't assume that every cable advertised as DisplayPort 2.1 can maintain the full 80 gigabits connection. A high-quality certified 2-meter cable can work as this one did in my testing, but once you go beyond that, maintaining UHBR20 becomes more difficult, and in that case, you may need a certified active DP80LL cable instead. So always check the certification rather than relying only on the DisplayPort 2.1 name. Next, I wanted to make sure Windows HDR was properly calibrated. For this, you can download Microsoft free Windows HDR calibration app from the Microsoft Store. The application gives us 3 main luminance patterns, and we should proceed until the pattern isn't visible anymore. For minimum luminance, it should be at 0. That's exactly what we expect from OLED because individual pixels can switch off completely. For the maximum luminance, it gets to 500. Same for max full frame luminance. I keep the color saturation adjustment at its default value because I don't want Windows adding extra digital saturation on top of the monitor on color controls. Finally, we can give the profile a name and save it. Inside the NVIDIA app, the monitor is detected as G-Sync compatible, as you can see. I have the output color depth set to 10 bits per channel, which is the maximum value, and the output format set to RGB and output dynamic range set to full. Now let's take a tour around the on-screen display settings to see what's actually packed there. Now I have to mention that this monitor doesn't have smart OS features, like we don't get Tizen OS as a standalone setup or any kind of smart features. When you press the joystick, 4 primary shortcuts appear. Moving up opens the main menu, left opens the source selection, down turns the monitor off, and right opens the custom shortcut. Inside the menu, in the Game tab, the first important option is Adaptive Sync. I recommend keeping this enabled for gaming. Adaptive Sync allows the monitor refresh rate to follow the frame rate produced by the graphics card. That reduces visible tearing and helps smooth out uneven frame delivery whenever the game isn't running at a perfectly fixed frame rate. The monitor officially supports AMD FreeSync Premium Pro and is also listed as NVIDIA G-Sync compatible. The next option is AI Upscaling. This is one of the new features found on this model compared to last year. It becomes available when the monitor resolution is below 4K. Later on, I'll test it at 720p, 1080p, and 1440p. We also have a black equalizer. This allows you to fine-tune the clarity of darker areas, but pushing it too high raises the shadow levels and reduces the deep contrast that makes OLED look so good. I prefer leaving it to the default value. There is also a virtual aim point. This places a crosshair directly over the image, and you can select between different crosshair shapes and position it however you like. We also have AI Select, which selects the most visible color for it, like based on the scene. Next, we have the Infinity Core Lighting, which controls the RGB ring behind the display and can add a soft lighting effect if you have it close to the wall. We have effects like aurora, rotating aurora, comet, static, rainbow, and breathing. Some of these effects allow you to choose the color manually to match it with your setup. When choosing static, Core Sync also becomes available. Now Core Sync makes the RGB ring synchronize to the screen, creating a minimalist ambient lighting effect behind the monitor. Now let's move on into the picture settings. As I'm currently using HDR, we have a dedicated picture mode called Display HDR. After comparing the available picture modes, Display HDR is my preferred starting point on this monitor. You can play around with them, but for me, Display HDR is the best. I have brightness set to the maximum value of 50. For HDR, I recommend leaving it at 50 so the monitor has access to its full available output. I also like having contrast set to 50, which is the maximum. Sharpness is 10 by default and I kept it there. Color is set to 30 by default and can be increased all the way to 50. For a wave but still controlled image, I recommend keeping it between approximately 25 and 30. We also have tint. I left it as the default because I didn't notice an obvious tint that needed correcting. Next, we have contrast enhancer. Setting it to high gives the image more perceived depth and punch between bright and dark areas. Contrast enhancer can darken some shadow detail and alter the separation between highlights. For color critical editing, I would leave it disabled. While for gaming and entertainment, I personally prefer high because the image looks deeper and more energetic. We then have HDR tone mapping with two options, static and active. Static follows a more consistent tone mapping curve. It normally preserves the intended looking between shadows, midtones, and highlights more accurately, while active analyzes and remaps the image more dynamically. On this specific monitor, active works surprisingly well, so that's why I kept it this way. It gives the image more brightness and energy without making every scene look obviously overprocessed. But for maximum color accuracy and graphics designing and accurate color production, static remains the safer option to use. While for gaming and for a more impactful HDR presentation, I personally prefer active. The monitor also gives us several color tone options between cool, standard, warm 1, warm 2, and natural. I compared standard and natural repeatedly because those two were the most balanced options to my eyes. Standard gave me the most comfortable result. White looked natural without looking blue at all, and the overall image didn't feel overly warm. To me, it felt the best this way. We can also adjust white balance. This provides more precise control over the red, green, and blue channels. Gamma changes how brightness is distributed through the darker and middle areas of the image. Shadow detail gives us a more focused control over near black visibility. Increasing it can reveal more inside dark scenes, but raising it too far makes the image look washed out and reduces OLED black level advantage, while lowering it produces deeper looking shadows, but it can crush different dark shades together and hide real detail. For everyday use, I recommend leaving it as the default value. Color space gives us native, auto, and normal. Native uses the monitor widest available color gamut. So for gaming and maximum visual impact, I prefer native. For editing, color-sensitive work, and more accurate reproduction, you can check auto if it gives you a more accurate image. We also have peak brightness. For HDR, I recommend setting this to high. Peak brightness allows smaller HDR highlights such as reflections, to use more of the panel available output. HDMI black level is currently disabled because I am connected through DisplayPort. Eye saver mode reduces blue light output and creates a warmer, softer image for longer viewing sessions. I wouldn't use it for HDR gaming or color-sensitive work because it changes the color temperature, but it can be useful when reading, browsing, or working late at night. Now you can see the calibration report shows information from factory testing and confirms that the display was checked against the quality control targets before leaving production. So all Samsung monitors are actually factory adjusted to make sure that users have similar expected experience. Inside the on-screen display menu, we can adjust how long the menu remains visible before automatically disappearing. Increasing the display time can be useful when you are comparing settings and want to avoid the menu closing while you are still examining the image. Inside the system menu, we first have See Colors mode. This provides presets intended to make certain color differences easier to distinguish for users with different forms of color vision deficiency. We also have the volume control for headphones or speakers connected through the audio jack. The off timer can automatically turn the monitor off after a selected period. There is also an echo timer option that can turn off the echo mode after a set time. Next, we can control our inputs, whether to use PC or AV mode for each of them. PC mode is designed for computer-style digital signals. It normally provides clean pixel mapping, clearer desktop text, and access to the monitor, PC-focused picture modes. While AV mode is designed for consumer video devices, it may scale or enlarge certain resolutions differently and can sometimes help when a device has unusual overscan or compatibility issues. For modern PCs and consoles that already output the correct digital resolution, I recommend keeping them on PC mode. Only use AV mode when it solves a specific scaling or compatibility problem. The DisplayPort version can also be selected. Naturally, I kept it set to DisplayPort 2.1. We then have the option to turn DisplayPort DSC on or off. Because my GPU, cable, and monitor are all connected through full UHBR20 DisplayPort 2.1, I disabled DSC and confirmed that the system remained at 4K 240Hz. That gives me a fully uncompressed DisplayPort connection and confirms that DSC isn't being enabled behind the scenes. If your graphics card doesn't support DisplayPort 2.1, you may need DSC to reach the same resolution and refresh rate. And there is nothing inherently wrong with that. The important advantage is that this monitor gives compatible hardware the option to run without it. We then have USB-C preference with high resolution and high-speed data modes. This setting sounds simple, but it hides an important trade-off. A USB-C cable contains a limited number of high-speed lanes. Those lanes need to be shared between the video signal and fast USB data. High-resolution selection prioritizes the video connection. That allows the highest available resolution and refresh rate, but it may reduce the bandwidth available to devices connected through the USB hub, while high-speed data reserves more bandwidth for USB transfers that can improve the speed of external SSD drive or another USB device connected to the monitor, but it leaves less bandwidth available for the display signal. This setting shouldn't change the USB-C charging level because power delivery is negotiated separately from the video and data lanes. Later, I'll show you exactly what changed when I tested both modes with my Galaxy notebook. Now we have Auto Source Switch Plus, which automatically changes to a newly active input when the current source has no signal. This could be useful if you often move between a desktop PC, laptop, and console. Instead of manually opening the source menu each time, the monitor can detect the newly connected active device and switch to it. You can also have it to switch to Type-C input automatically when no other source detected. Now we reach the OLED protection settings. Logo brightness detects static elements such as logos, taskbar, desktop icons, interfaces, and game HUD elements. The monitor can reduce the brightness of those areas to limit the stress being placed on the same pixels for long periods. High applies the strongest reduction, low applies a lighter adjustment. And finally off leaves the static elements at their original brightness. I personally prefer seeing every part of the image at equal brightness, so I kept it off. Keep in mind that disabling this protection feature can increase the risk of permanent image retention if you display the same static elements for many hours every day. For mixed use, low is probably the best compromise. For long productivity sessions with a fixed taskbar and static application interfaces, keeping the protection enabled is a safer choice. The second one we have is auto disconnection, which allows the monitor to disconnect the active source while it performs an automatic screen optimization or panel maintenance cycle. That prevents the connected source from continuing to treat the monitor as an active display while the panel is temporarily unavailable. You can also trigger pixel refresh manually, which takes around 30 minutes. However, the monitor also performs its normal maintenance automatically periodically. And beyond these software level features, the monitor also includes Samsung OLED Safeguard Plus, an internal cooling system that helps distribute heat more evenly across the panel. We also have Screensaver, which automatically dims the display after around 10 minutes of not use. Key repeat time option changes how quickly the menu responds when you hold the joystick in one direction. You can also control the power LED, so if you don't want the red LED showing during normal use, choose standby. The custom key can be assigned to picture mode, clock equalizer, eye saver mode, virtual aim point, infinity core lighting, or auto source switch plus. Finally, we have VRR control. This setting should not be confused with the adaptive sync. Adaptive sync enables variable refresh rate communication between the monitor and the source, while VRR control is additional monitor stabilization option that may help reduce flickering or unstable behavior in certain variable refresh rate situations. It's better to keep it on, but if you notice unusual micro stutter, brightness fluctuation, or another VRR related issue, test VRR control both on and off while leaving adaptive sync enabled. Now let's head on to the support menu to see what we have there. We have the self-diagnosis, which runs an internal panel test. This can help determine whether a visual problem is coming from the monitor itself or from the connected device or cable. So it's like a self-diagnosis feature. Now to update the firmware of it, you install the official update file from the monitor support page on a USB flash drive. Then connect it to the service USB port and select software update here. As for the firmware version installed on my unit, it's 1000.2. So far there isn't a newer firmware available. So my unit arrived out of the box with the latest version. We also have product registration that shows the serial number so you can register it on your Samsung account to make warranty management easier. Finally, factory reset restores all settings to their original values. One small feature I like is that you don't always need to press the joystick before accessing the 4 shortcuts. For instance, you can move it directly up, down, left or right directly and open the function you want. That makes, for example, source switching faster. Now I've connected my Galaxy Book directly to the monitor using the included USB-C cable to show you how it's like. With this single connection, the laptop sends its display signal to the monitor, connects to the monitor USB hub, and receives power all at the same time. That gives us a very clean dual-screen laptop setup without needing a separate HDMI or DisplayPort cable. And depending on the laptop, you may not even need to connect its charger. Of course, this technology isn't unique to this monitor, but it remains a strong point to have. Like the previous generation, G81SH32 OLED for the last year didn't have a USB Type-C port at all. Now when I have preference set to high resolution mode, it can run 4K and up to 240Hz, so the maximum resolution possible, while also charging my Galaxy Book. When I changed to high-speed data, the maximum stable combination became 4K at 120Hz. If I selected 240Hz, the resolution dropped to 1440p. Trying to force 4K and 240Hz in high-speed data mode will cause signal glitching because some of the available USB-C bandwidth was being reserved for faster data transfer. So the result is very clear. High resolution prioritizes display performance, while high-speed data gives more bandwidth to the USB hub and limits the display to 4K at 120Hz or 1440p at 240Hz. Still, it's worth saying that charging remained approximately the same in both modes. So my advice is choose high-speed data when faster transfers from external SSD or another high-speed USB device matter more than 4K at 240Hz. I also wanted to check it on a Galaxy tablet using the same USB-C cable. And as soon as the tablet detected the external display, it automatically switched into Samsung DeX mode. That immediately gives us a desktop-style interface on the monitor while the tablet continues charging, and this way we have dual display setup. You can keep a separate app open on the tablet, use it as a touchpad, or draw directly on it with the S Pen. And because the USB-C connection also carries data, you can connect a keyboard and mouse to the monitor's USB ports and use them with the tablet through the same cable. One USB-C cable effectively turns the tablet into a desktop-style computer while at the same time handling the video signal, peripherals, and the charging. Now, as we said, let's test the AI upscaling. And this feature was at the beginning more complicated to activate than I expected. I first wanted to combine Samsung AI upscaling with NVIDIA integer scaling. Integer scaling takes each original source pixel and enlarges it using an exact whole number multiplier. This can keep pixel, text, and hard edges looking cleaner than normal interpolation. The problem is that NVIDIA integer scaling is performed by the GPU. When GPU scaling is active, desktop may be rendering internally at 1080p, but the graphics card can still send a native 4K active signal to the monitor. Windows and the NVIDIA app may show 1080p as the desktop resolution, while the active signal resolution remains 4K. And because the monitor still sees a native 4K signal, Samsung AI upscaling option remains disabled. To activate the monitor AI upscaling, the monitor itself needs to receive an active signal below 4K. So to make it work, a disabled integer scaling shows scaling to aspect ratio and move the scaling device from the GPU to the display. After doing that, the desktop resolution and active signal resolution totally match. This way, the monitor finally recognizes that it's receiving a sub 4K signal and AI upscaling becomes available, as you can see. Look at the comparison and let me know which version you prefer. Starting with 1080p with AI upscaling enabled, the difference is quite visible. Edges appear more defined and the overall picture looks slightly cleaner. I also noticed that the processing increases some highlights and makes the image appear a little brighter. So it doesn't look like simple geometric scaling alone. The monitor also appears to be applying sharpening, local contrast enhancement, and general image refinement, all using AI. It happens all instantly with just a switch. Of course, the result still isn't identical to native 4K, and some details can look slightly processed when the sharpening becomes obvious. but compared with the standard 1080p scaling, the image is clearly more presentable. I then repeated the test at 1440p. The improvement is a little bit smaller. The image gains a little extra edge definition and refinement, but the difference isn't dramatic. Finally, I went all the way and tested 720p. And this is where AI upscaling makes the biggest difference to me. With AI upscaling, the monitor recovers a significant amount of perceived clarity. Hard edges becomes easier to identify, objects separate more clearly, and the overall image becomes significantly more watchable. What it is doing is improving edge definition, local contrast, and perceived sharpness in a way that makes low-resolution image look much better. For retro consoles, older PC games, low-resolution video, or situations where your graphics card can't maintain the frame rate you want at native 4K, this feature is quite useful. Now, since this monitor uses Samsung's 4th generation QD-OLED panel, I also wanted to see whether text clarity had improved. Historically, QD-OLED monitors have used an unusual sub-pixel arrangement instead of the traditional horizontal RGB stripe that Windows Clear type is designed around. Because of that, you can sometimes notice a subtle green or magnetic fringing around text, especially when sitting very close to the screen. When I extremely zoom in, I can still see some color fringing around certain letters and sharp edges, so the issue hasn't completely disappeared. However, compared to last year, G81SH, it looks slightly less distracting to me. From a normal viewing distance, text looks clean and completely usable for everyday work. Being 4K also helps a lot. At 32 inches, the monitor has a pixel density of 140 pixels per inch or ppi, making the pixels and sub-pixels artifacts much harder to notice during normal use. Next, I wanted to check how the panel reproduces basic colors. Starting with red, it looks deep, saturated, and very clean. Green is also bright and vivid, and finally blue looks pure. White is well balanced using the standard color temperature setting. It doesn't look excessively cold nor warm. It appears quite neutral and comfortable to my eyes. Now, something else that surprised me is how the automatic brightness limiter behaves. APL reduces brightness as a larger percentage of the screen becomes illuminated. OLED displays need this to manage power consumption, heat, and long-term panel stress. When only a tiny white square is displayed, like a small part of the display, the monitor can concentrate a large amount of power into that small area. As the white area becomes larger, more pixels require power at the same time. The monitor then gradually reduces luminance to remain within its electrical and thermal limits. But what I noticed on the G80SH that impressed me actually is how well the display maintains brightness as I increase the size of that white square. The brightness reduction becomes noticeable only when area approaches around half of the screen, so like 50%. Before that point, the monitor remains impressively bright. It doesn't immediately collapse into a dim looking as soon as a larger bright object appears. This behavior is consistent with the efficiency improvement Samsung describes for the penta-tandem structure. Because the electrical workload is distributed across 5 emitting layers now, the panel can produce more light without placing the same stress on each individual layer. That should help with efficiency, brightness, heat management, and potentially lifespan. Compared with the OLED monitors I've used before, including previous generation G81SH 32-inch that came out only last year and uses QD-OLED 3rd generation 4-layer emitting structure, the brightness consistency here feels very good. Of course, this still has APL, but the transition feels relatively well controlled, and larger daylight scenes remain brighter than I expected. And image quality is exactly what I was hoping to see from this 4th generation penta-tandem QD-OLED panel. The first thing you notice is how much depth the image has. Blacks are very deep rather than dark gray, and because every pixel controls its own light, Bright objects can sit directly beside completely dark areas without blooming or glowing around the edges. That makes shapes look extremely clean and well defined, especially in HDR scenes with strong contrast between light and darkness. Small highlights such as reflections, lights, fire, and sunlight really pop from the screen and can almost look three-dimensional because the surrounding pixels remain completely dark. Colors are another major strength. The quantum dot layer allows QD-OLED to produce rich, vivid colors while maintaining their saturation at higher brightness levels. And color for HDR scenes feel much more alive without looking washed out. The result is an image that looks vivid and impressive, but also natural and true to itself and full of detail. You can clearly distinguish different shades, textures, and objects within the scene, giving the picture a strong sense of separation and realism. I also noticed that viewing angles are also excellent. Even when looking at the monitor from the side, colors, contrast, and brightness remain very consistent, so you can still have a good viewing experience from practically any angle. For PC gaming, this monitor looks pretty appealing. At 4K and 240Hz, the image feels both extremely detailed and very fluid. It's also bright, colorful, and full of life. Colors look vivid and saturated, dark areas retain excellent depth, and the bright effects stand out clearly without blooming around them. Games look very crisp, rich, and immersive, especially in HDR, where the combination of deep blacks, intense highlights, and a strong color gives the image a much more three-dimensional appearance and more pop. Adaptive sync also helps keep gameplay smooth when the frame rate changes, reducing screen tearing. Overall, you get the clarity of 4K, the fluidity of 240Hz, and the vivid, high-contrast image quality of QD-OLED, all in the same display. It creates a kind of image that is immediately appealing and difficult to look away from. Once you become used to this level of clarity, going back to a different display can feel like a noticeable downgrade honestly. I compared HDR tone mapping again while gaming. Static produces the more controlled presentation. Highlights remain restrained, while active gives the image more lifting. Midtones become brighter, highlights appear more intense, and the overall presentation gains more energy. On this monitor, I prefer active for most gaming. It makes daylight scenes, bright environments, and dramatic HDR lighting feel more alive. The trade-off is that active may raise parts of the image that were intended to remain darker or compress some separation between already bright highlights. So for accuracy, choose static. For a brighter and more impactful gaming experience, active is my preference on this monitor. Recently, I've been playing Death Stranding 2 on the beach and it looks incredible here. The environmental detail is very noticeable. Fine textures in the ground, equipment, clothing, and surrounding landscape remain sharp because of the 4K resolution. Distant objects stay clear rather than blending together. Highlights on wet surface, metallic equipment, water, sunlight, and artificial lighting stand out clearly against the darker parts of the image. Like OLED pixel level contrast gives those scenes a sense of depth that is difficult for a conventional edge-led display and even mini LED monitors to reproduce. Dark scenes maintain true blacks without glowing around bright objects. The wide QD-OLED color gamut also helps with the skies, vegetation, lighting, and the game's more stylized visual elements. Everything from resolution, HDR, contrast, color volume, refresh rate, and pixel response is what makes the experience feel so complete. I also compared contrast enhancer while gaming. With it disabled, the image maintains the most neutral relationship between shadows, midtones, and highlights. Low adds some extra depth without dramatically changing the presentation. High gives us the strongest perceived contrast and the most immediate visual impact. I personally prefer high for cinematic games because it makes the image look deeper and more dramatic. Use off when accuracy is a priority. Use low when you want a moderate enhancement. And finally, use high when you want the most dramatic and punchy presentation. I made the same comparison with HDR tone mapping during these scenes. Static remained more controlled, while active gave the image more brightness, stronger highlights, and more visual impact. Now let's try it on the PlayStation 5 through HDMI 2.1. Here also make sure that HDMI input version is set to HDMI 2.1. I keep the settings close to my PC configuration. Now since the PlayStation 5 is technically a video device rather than a PC, I also tested AV mode. But when I changed it from PC to AV, the monitor changes the available picture processing and presets. Most importantly for me, the display HDR picture mode is no longer available. AV mode can be useful with older devices or like retro consoles or unusual video resolutions because it may scale or process the image differently. The PS5 already outputs a properly formatted digital signal, and because of that, there is simply no need to use AV mode just because it's a console. PC mode gives us access to the display HDR profile, maintains clean scaling and looks better. For that reason, AV mode remains useful as a compatibility option, but I will only use it when it serves a specific issue. Inside the PS5 video information screen, the console correctly recognizes the monitor support for 4K HDR, 120Hz output, and variable refresh rate. I also did the PS5 HDR calibration, and once configured, the image looks very beautiful. While the console can't use the monitor full 240Hz refresh rate, but 120Hz already produces a major improvement in supported games. Even 60Hz games benefit from OLED fast pixel response because motion remains cleaner than it would on a slower LCD. For a desk-based PlayStation 5 setup, the G80SH gives the console practically the best experience possible. Fine details look extremely crisp, colors are vivid, and small HDR highlights have excellent intensity. So overall image has a rich and polished appearance, with deep blacks giving darker scenes more depth, while bright effects, reflections, and lighting stand out clearly against them. Environments look clean and well-defined, colorful areas feel lively, and the combination of 4K resolution and the QD-OLED contrast gives the gameplay a much more immersive appearance. I also connected the Nintendo Switch 2, and the G80SH unlocks all of the display features the console currently supports in docked mode. You can use 4K output, HDR in compatible games. I found that positioning the final brightness slider slightly above the halfway point gives the image more visual impact without clipping the brightest details in the games I tested. I then tried altering between low, normal, and auto on HDMI black level. Usually, low gives the image deeper looking blacks. That's why you might have often seen me preferring it on Samsung monitors and televisions. I also compared HDR tone mapping. As with the PC and PS5, active creates a brighter and more vivid image. Static remains more restrained and may perceive the original brightness more accurately. For the Switch 2, I still prefer having it on active. Many Nintendo games use bright, heavily saturated art styles, and the additional color and brightness makes them look extremely lively on a QD-OLED panel. Overall, the Switch 2 gaming looks excellent on this monitor. So in summary, based on my experience with the Samsung Odyssey OLED G8 G80SH 32-inch, I think it's one of the most complete QD-OLED gaming monitors Samsung has ever produced. The 4th generation Penta-Tandem QD-OLED panel delivers strong HDR brightness, an extremely crisp 4K image, beautiful color, perfect blacks. From an image quality perspective, this 4th generation panel already feels like a meaningful step up from last year's 32-inch G81SF. It can produce extremely bright small highlights while maintaining surprisingly strong brightness as larger parts of the screen become illuminated. Connectivity is another major strength. Full bandwidth DisplayPort 2.1 UHBR20 allows compatible graphics card to deliver 4K at 240Hz with 10-bit color depths without display stream compression. USB-C carries video, data, and up to 98 watts of laptop charging through a single cable, as well as AI upscaling as we saw. So all of those are an update over last year model. The way I see it, this monitor is almost perfect. The main thing I will personally change is the display finish. Glare-free finish is extremely effective at reducing reflections and makes the monitor much easier to use in a bright room. However, I would still like Samsung to offer an alternative glossy or semi-gloss version with a high-quality anti-reflective treatment, possibly similar to what they have already been using on latest Galaxy books, tablets, and smartphones. Samsung is clearly capable of producing excellent anti-reflective treatment on glossy displays, and offering that on their gaming monitors could give us the best of both worlds: the clearer, more direct look of a glossy screen with deeper looking blacks and stronger perceived contrast, while still maintaining good reflection control and perceiving the excellent color quality of the QD-OLED panel. Second thing that I would love to see, a QD-OLED panel in a 42-inch TV size. It says that even after 4 years since QD-OLED first debuted, we are still waiting to see it offered in a 42-inch TV size. Like for my personal setup, 42 inches is the sweet spot between a desktop monitor and a television. It gives you a much more immersive image while still fitting comfortably and have a decent pixel per inch density. As you may know, I currently use the 42-inch Samsung S90H OLED TV, which I reviewed just a few days ago on the channel. It's a meaningful upgrade over last year 42-inch S90F, but Samsung still uses a WOLED panel for this size, while larger models in the lineup have already been available with QD-OLED for years. So maybe it's about time they do it for the smaller sizes too. Anyway, I'm also working on a direct comparison between the S90H and this 32-inch G80SH. Despite the obvious size difference, it should still be very interesting because we'll be comparing WOLED against 4th generation QD-OLED, also because both of them use the same glare-free matte finish. I'll be comparing the two, so make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss that comparison. But as things stands, the G80SH 32-inch is an excellent all-around OLED gaming monitor, and it's available in 27-inch if you prefer that size format. They combine premium image quality, impressive HDR, 4K clarity, a 240Hz refresh rate, full bandwidth DisplayPort 2.1, a useful USB-C functionality, and a strong console compatibility, all inside a clean and a minimalist design. Now, I want to know what you think. Would you like to have this monitor, or would the lack of a glossy option make you skip it completely? And are you like me and would also like to see Samsung release a QD-OLED in a larger 42-inch size TV? Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you found this review useful, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.